What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be breaking down all of the main card fights from this weekend's UFC Fight Night Holm versus Silva card. Now first of all, I want to apologise that this breakdown video is uploaded as late as it is. I put a video out on my website yesterday explaining the reasons for this, and basically the reason is this is just a very time consuming card to research. So you can see, just put a little 5-minute video and a message on Discord there explaining how challenging this card is. So basically, different cards take different amounts of time to research. So for example, last week's card, that UFC 290 card, it was quite a fast one to research because we had a lot of fighters who were making their debuts and there wasn't a great deal of good quality footage available on them from before they came to the UFC. And there would be a lot of fighters on the card that had fought to a lot of quick finishes. So when you don't have a lot of footage available on fighters on a card, or when they fight to a lot of quick finishes, obviously you don't have to spend as much time researching their matchups. You can get through them quickly. But then every once in a while, you run into a card like this, which is extremely time consuming to research because the majority of fighters on the card frequently fight to decisions. And there might be a lot of footage available on the majority of fighters on a card, and that's really what this card is like. There's 14 fights on this card. I know one of them has been cancelled, but I'd researched the Walt Harris versus Josh Parisian fight by the time that sorry for the notification, just keeping an eye on Bitcoin here. Yeah, I'd researched the fight before it had been cancelled. So that's why this upload is late this week. This is just taking a really long time to research this card. It is a bit of a nightmare. 14 fights, a lot of them are complex, interesting, great for betting. So it just takes a long time to work through. Whereas last week, for example, sorry, I'm going to have to keep this on, guys, because I've got a trade on Bitcoin at the moment. Whereas last week's card, the Moreno versus Pantoja card, I'd pretty much had that researched by Wednesday of last week, and pretty much all breakdown videos for every fight were out by Thursday. It was a quick card to get through. This one completely different. Why am I letting you know this now? Obviously there's nothing I can do to change it, because this video is coming out very late. I'm letting you know because next week's card is also the same, so expect another late upload next week. This Aspinall versus Tybura card next weekend, absolutely huge, very complex to research, very time consuming to research. There's 15 fights on next week's card, which is a massive amount of fights to work through, and yeah, it's very complex card, very time consuming fighters, very time consuming matchups to work through. Because if you think about it, right, if you're watching the last 3 or 4 fights of every single fighter on this card, and the majority of these fighters frequently go to a decision, then that is a huge amount of work to study 30 fighters in a week. And this week it was 28 fighters, obviously, because I'd already done Harris and Parisian, although Harris has got quite a few quick finishes under his belt. Now let's get into the main event between Holm and Silva. So this is a really interesting fight, very complex fight. I took a long time researching this matchup, and I do have a lot of thoughts on this fight. I do have a lot to say, and in many ways it's quite a clear-cut fight. It's quite a simple one to work out, but at the same time it's quite difficult to predict what will happen because both girls have pretty big weaknesses that the other is relatively well positioned to exploit. So even though that we know those weaknesses are there, it's difficult for us to gauge beforehand who's going to do a better job of exploiting the other's weakness. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds, we are going to start to be able to describe the reasons why this is a very interesting fight from a betting point of view. So we can see Holm is the favourite at average odds of around 1.57, which is going to be minus 175 for an implied probability of 64%. If we take a look at the odds on Silva, she's the underdog at average odds of around 2.40, which is going to be plus 140 for an implied probability of 42%. So, before we get into talking about how these two match up from a technical point of view, I need to kind of explain where I am with this card as a whole, because there are a lot of tempting bets on this card. There are a hell of a lot of tempting bets, and obviously if you're in my Discord, if you're a member of my community, and you've watched my breakdown videos for the prelim fights, you'll know that there are a lot of potentially good bets on the prelims, which I'm putting a lot of thought into at the moment and deciding what I'm going to do with them. Because even though there are a lot of very tempting bets on this card, I haven't found any bets where we would be overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour. So obviously I've talked a lot in recent weeks about how we've made big changes to our pre-fight betting strategy, which has produced incredible results, right? If we look at our pre-fight betting results, you can see since I made these changes last year, July last year, it's just been non-stop profit pretty much. Really nice steady uptrend. And why have I gone blurry? Why have I gone blurry? There we go. Nice steady uptrend over the last year. And we've only had one losing month in the whole of 2023, which was March. Obviously we're down a little bit this month, but we've only had 3 bets this month. So 3 events still to come in July. Good chance we'll turn this around. But the problem that I have with this card in particular is that even though there are a lot of tempting bets on this card, and Holm is one of them, I don't feel like any of the tempting bets are bets where we would be really overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour to the extent that something improbable has to happen in order to cause us to take a loss. And if I go through our last 10 bets, I'll give you an example of what I mean. So we lost a bet on Brandon Moreno, but based on past performances, we knew that Moreno's very tough. It would not be easy to get him out of there early. Him getting knocked down in round 1, being in a lot of trouble against Pantoja in round 1 kind of shows that. And where Pantoja's gassed very bad in the past, we knew that it would be difficult for Pantoja to outwork Moreno over a 5-round decision. He did. He won a split decision. He was very tired in the round, in the second round, but Pantoja was an absolute dog who was able to push through and get the win. But Moreno had a lot more past the victory than Pantoja did, so that's an example where we overwhelmingly stacked the odds in our favour. Look at the Ismagulov loss, and again we know if Ismagulov kept the fight standing, he would probably dominate, and we knew based on past performances it wouldn't be easy for Dawson to get the fight to the ground, keep the fight on the ground. He did. We lost the bet, but again, Ismagulov had many ways to win. You look at the Fakhretdinov win, and this was one of those fights where you've got 2 very good grapplers, but Fakhretdinov had the cardio to go hard for 3 rounds, whereas we know if you make Kevin Lee grapple hard, he slows very quickly. So that was another example, similar to the Moreno bet, really, where we knew Lee may have a little bit of success early, but it would be unlikely that Lee would be able to outwork Fakhretdinov over 3 rounds. Fakhretdinov instantly got the quick finish. We didn't have to sweat that. That was another good example how we overwhelmingly stacked the odds in our favour. With Randy Brown, another example, right? We researched the fight. Randy Brown was significantly better than Wellington Turman everywhere. Better striking, better grappling. Now, as it happens, with the Turman Brown fight, we got a bit of a situation like with Pantoja, Moreno, Ismagulov, Dawson, where Pantoja and Dawson looked a lot better than they had done in a good amount of their fights from over the last sort of 2-3 years. And Turman also had made big improvements. He caused Brown a lot more problems in that fight than I thought he would. Fortunately, the skill gap was big enough where Brown was still enough to get, still good enough to do enough to win the first 2 rounds, got us the win. Irene Aldana, cardio machine, can fight at a high pace, can throw a high volume of strikes. We know fighters almost always lose their retirement fights, and we know, Amanda Nunes was coming in to retire. So a punt to big underdog odds on the younger, hungrier bull didn't pay off. But again, a situation where when you look at how the Juliana Pena, the first fight, played out, Aldana was well positioned to execute the same sort of game plan. The blueprint was written on Nunes, on how to beat Nunes. Aldana just needed to follow it. She didn't. We take a loss. But again, kind of stacking the odds in our favour in that one with how generous the odds were. And how Aldana had a clear path to victory. She just chose not to take it by showing Nunes too much respect. Same with Jazz Duvicius. We knew she'd have a significant advantage on the ground. We knew Maverick had bad takedown offense, bad ground game. She came in the grappling heavy game plan. She'd likely win. She did. She got it done. Same shit with Hooper, really. Both Fiore, Hooper were grapplers. Hooper was the better grappler. We knew if this fight involved a lot of grappling, Hooper would likely win. Dog odds, he did. Got the win. Tainero Lisboa. We identified in the research that Lisboa was probably better than Jessica Rose Clark everywhere. Similar to Amanda Nunes, Jessica Rose Clark had also been talking a lot about retiring, and so bet Lisboa, better than Rose Clark almost everywhere. Rose Clark 1 foot out the door with retirement. Obviously we got the win in the even money odds range, and these are just examples of how you can stack the odds in your favour by having situations where the fighter you're betting on has lots of ways to win, and while you're never going to find a bet without any risk factor, by limiting the way you can lose to small risk factors or a small amount of risk factors increases the probability that your fighter is going to get the job done and win. Same with Belal Muhammad. We knew that Burns slows down a lot as fights wear on. Similar logic really with the Muhammad bet to the Moreno bet. When you've got guys like Pantoja, Gilbert Burns, Amanda Nunes, Kevin Lee, it's not easy for fighters like this to win decisions because of how much they slow down. And obviously Belal Muhammad outworked him over 5 rounds. And then the Cortez Acosta bet, just De Lima's old as hell. Again, slows as fights wear on. But Cortez Acosta's takedown offense let him down. And you know what? I would say that was probably the last bad bet that we placed that went against this new system. So the reason why I wanted to quickly review the last 10 bets is that you could kind of see where my head is at with my approach to this card, because I feel all these bets that we've placed, before I get into this next point, let's just check we're holding this level. We are. Okay, so the reason why I want to go over the last 10 bets is because I feel that these 9 bets here, win or lose, were extremely solid. I feel that with every single one of these bets, we overwhelmingly stacked the odds in our favour. And while, we did take 3 losses, ultimately we did go 6-3 on these 9 bets. And I feel our money was in really strong positions with all of them. And what's interesting is, with the 3 losses that we took, I don't feel there was a whole lot we could do to get away from them. Betting Aldana as a big underdog when it was clear she had the skills, the cardio, the toughness, the chin to follow the blueprint Pena wrote on how to beat Nunes. Kind of hard to get away from that. Similarly with how good Ismagulov's takedown offense has looked, how much Dawson has slowed in the past, how great he is at usually working his way back up to his feet. Even money, very generous odds, hard to get away from it. And obviously it's very rare you see guys that slow down as much as Pantoja does win a 5-round decision. So very, very difficult to get away from that one as well. But when you look at the Cortez Acosta bet, I think this was the last bad bet that we placed, because when we researched that fight, we could have seen that Cortez Acosta was, very bad on the ground, and if De Lima was able to use a grappling heavy game plan, he would have a lot of success, and that's exactly what he did. De Lima got Cortez Acosta down repeatedly, dominated him on the ground, and we took an L. So one of the big changes that I've made in the last year is to just stop placing bets like this, and instead place the kind of bets where we're overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour, and something small, or one of the smaller risk factors, has to play out in order for us to lose the bet. And my problem with this card, to bring things full circle, complete the point I'm trying to make, is that there are a lot of extremely tempting bets on this card. There's a lot of them, but none of them are rock solid. None of them are where we're overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour. All of the tempting bets on this card have significant risk factors, which are the kind of bets that produce periods of break even like this, where we just float around break even for a while. The kind of bets that print money for us and keep us on this, really nice, steady, consistent uptrend are, these kind of bets, right? Win or lose, they're these kind of bets, right? We're overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour and grinding, up those profits long term. So that's the problem I have with this card. Do I place, 5 or 6 pre-fight bets on this card, level stakes, and hope that we win more than we lose? Or do I, potentially make the mistake that I made during, this period of break even here and, place 5 or 6 bets on fighters that all have pretty good chances of winning, but then risk taking a loss? Do I keep it patient and wait for those gifts from the universe to come where our money would be in a far stronger position, like with these 9 bets? I'm not sure, man. I am not sure. Let me know in Discord what you think below. Let me know if you're watching on YouTube what you think in the comments below. Let me know in the Discord if you're a member of my community. If not, let me know on YouTube. What should I do? Because I'm going to be talking a lot about very tempting bets in this video, but I haven't bet any of them yet myself, even though I'm extremely tempted to. I think this is really the first real test I've had in a while where do I stick to the strategy that has enabled us to basically, grind nice, steady, consistent profits over the last year? Or do I deviate and go back to the strategy I kind of used back here? Don't know. It's tricky because if we were end up to make a profit this weekend from those 5-6 bets I'm considering, then obviously it would be like, fuck, I should have trusted myself more and placed those bets. But then if we make a loss, I'll beat myself up and I will be like, why the fuck did I do that? I knew I should have passed. I knew I should have stuck to, the strategy and formula that has helped us really turn pre-fight betting around. So it's very tricky. I need your help with this one. Let me know in the Discord. So yeah, that's the predicament I'm in with this card. So my head's kind of scrambled, and that's one of the reasons why it's taking me so long to research this card. Is just because there's so much to think about. We're already down a little bit this month. I don't want to make it worse. So I don't know. It's a very, very tricky card. It's what I would say about this card though is it's one of those cards which is likely to be very good for live betting, because the matchups are so interesting, they're so complex, there's so many layers to all these different fights that they tend to be the fights we perform pretty well on in live betting. So I am really optimistic for live betting this week, whereas last week I said that that UFC 290 card would be very, very difficult for live betting. I even said it would be one of the most difficult cards of the year to live bet. This weekend, I think this weekend could be one of the best. So we'll see, man. We will see. So how do they match up from a technical point of view? Why is this fight giving me such trouble? Well, if we start off by looking at the tail of the tape on this one. So Holm, 41 years old, 5'8" with a 69-inch reach. Mayra Silva, 31 years old, 5'6" with a 66.5-inch reach. So a couple of X factors for us to dig into there. You can see that Holm is a little bit longer, a little bit taller than Mayra Silva. Slight reach advantage, nothing too major. But we can also see a big difference in age, with Mayra Silva being 10 years younger than Holm. So we know that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there is a 10-year age gap in a fight. So already, where I'm very tempted to bet Holm this weekend, we start to get some reasons why that might be a dangerous thing to do, right? Because ultimately, you're betting Holly Holm at an implied probability of 64%, and we know statistically her opponent has a 70% chance of winning based on those age stats, and her odds mean that she's got an implied probability of just 41%. So if you were to just blind bet that statistic over the long term, you've got like a 30% margin over the bookie. Now obviously blind betting anything is a very bad idea. It's a very dangerous thing to do. Every fight is different, styles make fights. You wouldn't want to be blind betting any statistic in MMA, but what you can use statistics like that for is to give us reasons to just be a little bit more cautious with certain fighters that we're attempting to bet. And it's very, very rare that fighters in their 40s win fights in the UFC. There will always be exceptions to the rule, like Robbie Lawler last weekend, but as a general rule, this is a young person's game, and Holly Holm's going to be declining significantly from fight to fight, whereas Mayra Bueno Silva is going to be improving a lot from fight to fight, and we are seeing improvement in her. Recently we've seen big improvements from Grant Dawson as an example, that cost us money. We lost the bet on Ismagulov. We saw improvement from Wellington Turman, which almost cost us money with a bet on Randy Brown. Fortunately it didn't. But Mayra Bueno Silva is getting better from fight to fight. There's no denying that, and that's pretty big risk factor in betting this matchup. Now, in terms of how these two match up stylistically, what's interesting is both girls are strikers. Holly Holm's obviously a kickboxer. Mayra Bueno Silva is, she's got a base in Muay Thai. However, this is one of those fights where if the fight stays standing, I think Silva absolutely smokes Holly Holm. I don't think this will be close. I think if the fight stays standing, Mayra Bueno Silva will win very, very comfortably. And the reason being, Holly Holm has never really had much power in her hands. I know she's got the famous knockout over over Ronda Rousey. But if you look at her record, she is a bit of a decisionator, and she hasn't finished anyone in 6 years, ever since she knocked out Bethe Correia with a late head kick. Outside of that, it's been decision city for Holly Holm over the last 6 years. So she's not the most dangerous striker, more of a volume striker, but she's not particularly accurate either. She does miss a very big percentage of the strikes that she throws. She kind of just tries to use her footwork and movement to chip away at you from a safe distance, but that's not really going to bother Mayra Bueno Silva, who's tough as nails, extremely durable, lands hard, damaging, impactful strikes, great leg kicks, good combinations. She's mean, she's nasty. Holly Holm may outpoint Silva in this one, but I think it'll be very hard for Holly Holm to win rounds against Silva on the feet, because Silva is the one that is going to be landing the harder, damaging shots that are going to get attention from the judges. And so if the fight stays standing, very, very confident Silva will win this. But Holly Holm has obviously gone through a bit of an evolutionary process in the later stage of her career, similar to Glover Teixeira, where she's kind of realised that she's not as effective on the feet as she used to be. And so now what we see from her is implementing grappling heavy game plans in most of her fights, right? So yeah, Holly Holm has reinvented herself a little bit like Glover, where now she's starting to use more grappling heavy game plans in order to increase her chance of winning, right? So we see a lot of clinch work from Holly, a lot of takedown attempts, a lot of grappling control, that kind of thing. Holly is definitely reinventing herself, and that makes this an interesting stylistic matchup, because we know Mayra Bueno Silva's biggest weakness is her takedown offense and ground game. So if we look at a little bit of footage of Mayra Bueno Silva, what are the best fights to illustrate this? If we look at, in fact, pretty much all these fights illustrate this, but if we pick up on the Stephanie Egger fight, let's take a look at this one. So obviously she beat Stephanie Egger, but there is a sequence in this fight which shows how bad her takedown defense and ground game is. I want to use this fight because it's one of her most recent ones, but this will kind of highlight the issues with Mayra Bueno Silva in this matchup. So if we just skip through, Here we go. So here you can kind of see Mayra Bueno Silva is a very low level on the ground. So just 30 seconds into round 1, Egger working for a judo throw, gets the fight to the ground. Now Mayra Bueno Silva is not in a particularly bad position here. She's got her back, but you can see that Egger easily just pivots in the top position, and Mayra Bueno Silva gets flattened out easily. Now Mayra Bueno Silva does have a very active guard, but this is part of her problem because her grappling base is Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. When she's on her back like this, she's more interested in attacking with long shot submissions than she is working her way back up to her feet. So this is an example of a fight where Silva does the wrong thing and gets rewarded for it. What Silva should be trying to do in this position, when she initially gets taken down here, is that she should be trying to get her back tight to the cage to protect her back from having her back taken, and then she should be trying to use the cage to wall walk back up to her feet by clearing her legs out from underneath Stephanie Egger. She doesn't do that. She actually allows Egger to move her away from the cage, which you'll see here, or she actually kind of moves herself away from the cage as well as she tries to throw her legs up for an armbar. But in this position, what she should be doing with this active guard is trying to basically push Egger off with her feet so that she can scramble to the cage, use the cage as a tool to wall walk back up to her feet. But as you can see in this sequence, she isn't interested in trying to work her way back up to her feet. She's more interested in trying to attack with arm bars off her back. This is the wrong thing to do. It works out for her on this occasion where she is able to submit Egger off her back, but what you've noticed is that Egger is now rotated Mayra Bueno Silva away from the cage to the point where Silva now has a lot more work to do to scramble over to the cage and start a wall walk, because Egger is slowly rotating them around where Egger is creating a barrier between Silva and the cage. So in this sequence, she gets, I can't really call it lucky. Ultimately it's a nice armbar. She does get the win. I'm not going to call it lucky, but she did the incorrect thing, basically, and got rewarded by the universe for it. That's just a sequence of how bad Mayra Bueno Silva is on the ground. We'll go a little bit further back for the next clip. There's flashes of Mayra Bueno Silva's ground game in all of her fights. So we do have to go back a bit far to the Montana De La Rosa fight for this clip, but it's basically because I want to show you weaknesses in Mayra Bueno Silva's skill set that still exist, but they're not as obvious in some of her more recent fights than they are in this one. So this is just so you can have in your mind the issue with Mayra Bueno Silva. So the issue with Mayra Bueno Silva is, and you're kind of seeing it here, we'll actually play this sequence out. So the issue with Mayra Bueno Silva is that her initial takedown defense is really good. So when you shoot in on her, like we're seeing from Montana De La Rosa here, her takedown defense is great. Her balance is good. She uses really good technique. You can see she's fighting for an underhook here on the left side, creating a nice wide base with her legs. She does everything right. Takedown defense is really, really good. She's strong, she's athletic, she's got great balance, she's good in the clinch. Takedown defense is great. We see it again here, right? Montana De La Rosa fishing for a single leg, and Mayra Bueno Silva just very comfortable here in stuffing the threat of the takedown. So Mayra Bueno Silva's initial takedown defense is very, very good. The issue with Mayra Bueno Silva is that if you chain wrestle and persist with takedowns, you can get her down. And like we've seen in the Stephanie Egger fight, if you put Mayra Bueno Silva on her back, she is very, very, very weak off her back. She has an active guard where she attacks with obviously a lot of arm bars and things like that. But obviously if you're a decent grappler, if you've got a heavy top game, you can neutralize that. So here we can see Mayra Bueno Silva's takedown defense is held up, into the 8th minute of this fight against Montana De La Rosa. But De La Rosa does get a takedown here. And what I want you to basically pay attention to is how ineffective Silva is off her back when she has someone with a decent top game on top of her. So De La Rosa, working with this takedown, eventually will get her hands connected on this double leg. You can see there, so she's able to pick Silva up, turn her away from the cage, and get the takedown. So now you'll start to see how weak Mayra Bueno Silva is off her back. So again, not really showing any attempt to wall walk, which means, remember in the last clip against Stephanie Egger when I said the correct thing to do was Silva get her back tight to the cage, keep her back tight to the cage, defend her back from being taken, and then she can start a wall walk back up to her feet. But Stephanie Egger didn't make her pay for that. This is a good example of where Mayra Bueno Silva is made to pay for the weaknesses that she has on the ground. So watch this. So here, what Mayra Bueno Silva should be trying to do is keep this back tight to the cage so that she can use the cage to protect her back from being taken and wall walk back up to her feet. But notice how Montana De La Rosa has reached around the back of Silva with this right arm. This is to try and create a barrier between the cage and Mayra Bueno Silva so that she can't wall walk. And watch what Montana De La Rosa does here. She's going to try and move. So what Silva should be trying to do is stay as tight to this cage as possible. What Montana De La Rosa wants to do is get into this space here, in between Silva and the cage, because from this space, Silva can no longer use the cage as a tool to work her way back up to her feet. It's far harder for Silva to work her way back up to her feet in this territory out in the middle of the octagon. So that's exactly what Montana De La Rosa does. Look here, now she's got a right arm and a right leg in this area here to create that barrier. And Silva's had her back taken, and what is the end result? The end result is, in order to defend the back take, Silva's got to roll onto her back, which means now she's nowhere near the cage, and she can no longer use the cage as a tool to work her way back up to her feet. So, good example of where Silva makes a lot of mistakes on the ground that decent grapplers will punish her for, and you can see Montana De La Rosa's actually mounted her here. So Silva went from a position where she wasn't really in that much trouble, tight against the cage, could have used the cage to wall walk back up to her feet. They're now in a position where she's nowhere near the cage, and she's in mount against someone with a heavy top game. So Mayra Bueno Silva is one of these fighters that makes a lot of mistakes on the ground. She often gets away with them against lower level opponents, but fighters like De La Rosa, maybe fighters like Holm, they will be able to make her pay. And we're just going to let this remaining minute of this round play out so you can kind of see how weak Silva is off her back. Because to the untrained eye, to people that don't understand MMA grappling on like a super deep level, Silva can look good on the ground because she's caught a lot of girls in arm bars. She's, very active off her back. But when you actually drill down and look at Silva underneath someone that has a decent top game, you really start to see how bad her ground game is. So it's really important for us to point this out, because you will get people that are picking Silva to win this weekend, and if Silva hits an armbar off her back on Holm in like the first 2 minutes, people will be like, oh my god, Silva's amazing, like I knew this would happen, when you can see she's actually pretty awful on the ground. But obviously, MMA is a chaotic, crazy sport where chaotic and crazy things happen quite frequently. So just wanted to show you that. So why am I showing you those clips? Why are they important? Well, they are important because Montana De La Rosa, in my opinion, is a better offensive wrestler than Holm. One of Holm's problems is that the majority of her takedowns come from the clinch position. And because Mayra Bueno Silva has a base in Muay Thai, her clinch game is very good. She's very, very strong in the clinch, as we've seen. Good balance, good takedown defense from the clinch. In order to take someone like Mayra Bueno Silva down, you've got to either shoot really nicely timed deep double leg takedowns out in the middle of the octagon where you can get in deep on her legs and hips, which typically speaking Holm doesn't do because the majority of her takedowns come from the clinch, or you need to be able to get in deep on Mayra Bueno Silva's legs and hips from the clinch position, which we saw Montana De La Rosa do in round 2, where she was able to connect her hands around Silva's legs on that double leg. Holly Holm isn't particularly good at that. Most of her takedown attempts come above hip height. She does occasionally get in on the legs and hips of Silva, but not very often. So with a fight like this, my question is, will Holm be able to get Silva down in 3 of the 5 rounds? To obviously use grappling to win 3 of the 5 rounds to take a decision. Not so sure. I do think Holm will get Silva to the ground in this fight. I don't think Holm will be able to cause Silva many problems on the ground in this fight, but she will be able to hold her down and control her. She's big, she's strong, heavy top game, good grappling control. But I do think Holly will have to stand and strike for a decent amount in this fight. And Silva's going to be landing the harder, more damaging strikes on the feet. She's going to be landing probably the harder, more impactful strikes in the clinch. The question is, will Holly be able to get Silva down enough in 3 of the 5 rounds to be able to win a decision? I'm not so sure of that. It is a tricky one. Like I say, Holly Holm, her offensive wrestling's not the best. Does have a tendency to shoot in too high above her opponent's hips. And yeah, Mayra Bueno Silva, as you've seen from that Montana De La Rosa footage, pretty good at defending takedowns of that nature. On top of that, Silva's a lot younger, right? 10 years younger than Holm, so she could be making big improvements. So my problem with this fight is that while on the surface it is a good stylistic matchup for Holly Holm because of how bad Silva is off her back, you know, I have to ask myself whether I'm getting a good deal on Holly Holm as a reasonably big favourite. You know, with the fact that at 41 years old, she's going to be declining from fight to fight. Silva's not the easiest to take down. And also her takedown offense could have improved a lot since it was last really tested. It is tricky though, because with a fight like Mayra Bueno, or with a fighter like Mayra Bueno Silva, she keeps getting rewarded for mistakes. So she got taken down easily against Mara Romero Barella, looked very weak off her back, and was submitted, or caught a submission off her back. You know, long shot armbar. Did the same to Gillian Robertson. Did the same to Stephanie Egger. Similar sort of thing with Lena Landsberg as well. So this is one of those situations where Mayra Bueno Silva keeps getting rewarded for doing the wrong thing. So when I look at someone like this, I'm not sure if she has that much motivation to treat the floor like lava in this fight, because with her winning so many fights off her back with long shot submissions, you know, she might feel confident in her ability to let Holly have top position in the hope that she'll be able to hit a submission off her back, and that's really the problem with someone like Silva. So from a betting point of view, when I look at this matchup, there's no way that I would bet Silva in this fight. I just think she's too weak off her back. You know, it's one of those situations where, you know, I just wouldn't feel comfortable betting on a fighter that has such a big weakness in their skill set that their opponent is absolutely capable of exploiting. But on the flip side, I don't love Holly Holm as a reasonably big favourite, knowing that she's old, she's going to be declining. At any time now she could turn up without letting us know with plans to retire, and we know that, you know, fighters very rarely win their retirement fight. There will be exceptions. The rule, Robbie Nunes, you know, you always have exceptions to every rule, but generally speaking, fighters going into their retirement retire a big percentage of the time. Lose a big percentage of the time. So yeah, with Holly, there's a lot of notable risk factors there, and generally speaking, if I'm going to bet a fighter in this odds range, I don't want there to be any major risk factors. I feel like there are with Holly, so that's probably why passing this weekend is probably the smartest thing to do, in my opinion. So, probably going to pass on this one, but let me know what you think in the comments below. If we take a look at the over-under on this fight, obviously both girls are very tough. Both are pretty good defensively everywhere. It won't be easy for Silva to get a knockout on the feet or stop Holly with strikes, because Holly's got a great chin, moves very well, very good defensively, very technical, great cardio. So it's not that likely that we'll see a finish on the feet. Both girls tough as nails. We saw Silva take tons of damage on the feet against Manon Fiorot. Held on. It wasn't, close to getting finished, and Fiorot was a lot more dangerous on the feet than Holm. So I don't see a finish on the feet. On the ground as well, both girls reasonably good at defending themselves. I wouldn't see a finish on the ground either. So I do think it's more likely this fight goes to a decision. Unfortunately, the odds are pretty steep, and they don't really excite me very much. I would give them a miss. Betting on the fight to go to a decision at steep favourite odds like this is not appealing to me at all. So I would give that a pass. In terms of props on this one, Silva by decision at 5.0 plus 400, that's interesting to me. Just because I do think Holm will struggle to get the fight to the ground in 3 out of the 5 rounds, which is what she's going to need to do in order to win a decision here. I could be wrong, but I think Silva will make Holm work very hard for the takedown. So Silva by decision's interesting to me. I don't like props. It's not something I'll be betting myself. But if you're the type of person that likes to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching it more interesting, Silva by decision is probably your best bet. Alright, into the next one. Jun Yong Park against Albert Duraev. So if we can see that Jun Yong Park is a reasonably big favourite at odds of around 1.63, which is going to be minus 159 for an implied probability of 61%. If we take a look at the odds on Duraev, he's around an average of 2.25, which is going to be plus 125 for an implied probability of 44%. So Jun Yong Park is 32 years old, 5'10", with a 73-inch reach. And Albert Duraev is 34 years old, 5'11", with a 75-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size, and this is an interesting matchup because it's a classic striker versus grappler matchup, right? Duraev, very, very good MMA grappler, great combat sambo practitioner, and Jun Yong Park has a base in boxing. So this fight is going to come down to whether or not Jun Yong Park can keep the fight standing, where he should have a pretty big advantage. Duraev is one of these guys that has really bad cardio, so he slows down a lot as fights wear on, and when he slows, his volume falls off a cliff, just doesn't throw a particularly high volume of strikes, and on top of that, he gets very sloppy, very, very bad defensively. And so, if Jun Yong Park can keep this fight standing, he should outstrike Duraev by a wide margin. He's got good footwork, good movement, and a good jab. Doesn't have too much power in his hands, but he for sure has the striking to outstrike Duraev by a wide margin. The question here is, how does Jun Yong Park's takedown defense look in 2023? Because for the longest time, Park's takedown defense and ground game was his biggest weakness. You know, if you go back and watch his fight against Anthony Hernandez from 2019, he just got taken down, absolutely mauled on the ground. He looked very, very low level. But since then, we've seen Park make exponential improvements to his takedown defense and ground game to the point where he was even able to use grappling to get wins in his last 2 against Dennis Chulinlin and Joseph Holmes. So this is one of those situations where we know Park is improving, but we just don't know how much, because he hasn't really faced a strong wrestler since Anthony Hernandez, right? No one's really tested his takedown defense and ground game in a way that Albert Duraev is capable of testing it, because we know Duraev has got great offensive wrestling, good chain wrestling, good grappling control, and he obviously can inflict a lot of damage from top position with ground and pound as well. So what's interesting about this fight is Duraev has got this curse where he is a very strong offensive wrestler, he is a very good MMA grappler, but the more he grapples, the faster he gets tired. Grappling accelerates the rate at which he slows down. So I could see a situation in this fight where Duraev has a lot of success with his grappling early, but that might come at a cost where he then doesn't have the energy to get takedowns into the second and third rounds, which is basically what we saw in his fight against Chidi Njokuani. Now, what I've noticed about Duraev is that when he gets tired, he kind of stops shooting takedowns. So when he's fresh, you'll see a decent amount of grappling from him, but as soon as he gets tired, kind of completely abandons the grappling and starts to stand and strike. And when that happens, he'll be in a lot of trouble, because Parker's got good cardio and he'll likely be able to outstrike Duraev by a wide margin. So this is one of those fights where I think Duraev has got a pretty good chance of winning round 1, especially if he uses a grappling heavy game plan. When Duraev is fresh, I think he'll cause Park some problems. But I would expect Park to win round 3, because by the 3rd round, no matter how the first 2 rounds go, I think Duraev is going to be too tired to get Park down in the 3rd. This fight is going to come down to that 2nd round, that swing round, where it's just a question of whether Duraev will have enough energy to get Park to the ground and steal round 2 with grappling. Personally, I don't think he will. I think Park is going to be scrambly enough to force Duraev to burn through enough energy early in the fight where he won't have a lot of success with his grappling in the 2nd, which is kind of what we saw in Duraev's last fight against Njokuani. But we haven't seen a whole lot of Park on his back in the last couple of years, so we can't feel totally sure. Park could be one of these guys that is improving his grappling, but like Mayra Bueno Silva, if you put him on his back, is still really weak. We haven't really seen many really good grapplers put Park on his back because he hasn't fought any really good grapplers. So this could actually be one of those matchups where Park's very weak off his back and gets exposed a bit like he did against Hernandez. But I'm optimistic for him. In his fights over the last 3-4 years, he has shown flashes of big improvements since the weaknesses that he's shown us in his debut against Hernandez. So I do lean Park in this one. I do think he'll win. Again, like Holly Holm, Park is a very tempting bet this weekend. Park is another one of these fighters that I'm just very, very tempted to bet, because I don't think Duraev has got the cardio to keep up with the pace that Park is going to set over 3 rounds. But it goes back to what we were saying early in that Holly Holm breakdown. With Park, he's a dangerous bet because he has a big weakness in his skill set, which is his defensive grappling, which is a weakness that his opponent Albert Duraev is well positioned to exploit. So even though I do heavily lean Park, I think he's more likely to win. That is a big risk factor for me if I were to bet Park as a reasonably big favourite. So yeah, it's just very, very tricky. Very, 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 very tricky. Tricky. So, hope you found that useful. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Let's get into looking at the over-under on this one though before we wrap up the breakdown. So where are we? Where are we? Here we go. So the over-under on this one. You can see the over-under is in the even money odds range. I do think this fight is pretty likely to go to a decision. I'm very tempted to bet the over in this fight. I say that because if you look at Park's record, even though he has had some quick finishes recently, these were quick finishes against guys that were at a very low level on the ground, and he was able to take them down, wear them out, and submit them. Prior to that, Park was frequently fighting to a lot of decisions. If you look at Duraev's record, very much a decisionator. Decision. This fight was probably heading towards a decision as well. What we've seen from Duraev is that even when he gets tired, he's very tough. He took a lot of damage in the Kopylov fight, took a lot of damage in the Buckley fight. Obviously the doctor stopped the fight, but he was willing to keep going. So Duraev is one of these guys that even when he gets tired, he will hang in there and keep fighting. When you look at Jun Yong Park, he's also tough as nails. Good chin. Obviously we don't know a whole lot about how capable he is of defending himself on the ground, but I'd assume he would do reasonably well. We've seen Duraev have decent periods of grappling in the Njokuani fight, the Kopylov fight. Kopylov, Njokuani, very low level on the ground, probably lower level on the ground than Park. So if they can survive on the ground against Duraev, good chance Park can too. And like I say, Duraev becomes significantly less effective past round 1. So Park's only got to kind of survive the grappling in the first, and then it's unlikely Duraev will have the energy to get a finish into the 2nd and 3rd. So I do think it is very likely that I've gone blurry, and we need to fix that. There we go. Very, very likely this fight will go the distance, so I'll probably be betting that I do quite like that. We'll probably sprinkle a little bit on that. I think reason why the odds are more generous than they should be is the bookies have kind of seen, you know, 3 of Park's last 4 fights end inside the distance, and so, you know, they thought this one is potentially going to end inside the distance as well, which it might. But I do feel like these 2 fights are skewing the odds a little bit and influencing the odds in a way that it gives us a little bit of value on this fight to go to a decision. So, in terms of prop bets, Park by decision is the only prop that would interest me on this fight, but the odds are pretty bad, so I would give that a miss. Like I say, if you're the kind of guy that wants to sprinkle a little bit of money on every fight to make watching it more interesting, maybe go Park by decision, but the odds are quite short on that, and I don't think you're getting a particularly good deal on your money. So, hope you found that useful. Alright, now let's break down the fight between Chelsea Chandler and Norma Dumont. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Dumont is the favourite at average odds of around 1.71, which is minus 141 for an implied probability of 58%. If we take a look at the odds on Chandler, she's around an average of quite a big odd spread. We'll call it 2.18, which is going to be plus 118 for an implied probability of 46%. So, Chandler, 32 years old, 5'8", with a 68-inch reach, and Norma Dumont, 32 years old, 5'7", with a 67-inch reach. Now, what's interesting about this one is that both these ladies look like they're exactly the same age and the same size. But at the weigh-ins today, it does appear there might be a decent size difference between these two. Now, from this camera angle, it's not the easiest to see because we can't see what footwear they are wearing, but in this shot you can certainly see Chandler seems the far bigger, more physically imposing fighter. So I don't know if these numbers on the tail of the tape are wrong, but there's a bit of a size difference here. In fact, what I'm going to try and do is see if we can actually get a different camera angle, because I know, yeah, MMA Junkie have got one here. So maybe we'll be able to see them from a different angle to try and work out whether one girl is like barefoot or in sandals, the other one is in shoes, which can, you know, quite often by quite a lot skew the size difference between the two, which you wouldn't expect, just the size difference in the actual shot of the face-off. So you've got to be careful with stuff like this. So this should give us a better angle. Oh, interesting. Wow, okay. So when I saw... I've got rid of it. What a fucking idiot. What an absolute clown. Sorry, guys. What a clown. Here we go. We go back. What a clown. Okay, so here it is. No, it isn't. Lost my place. It's going to be up around here, right? There we go. Okay, so you'd be surprised how much footwear can have an impact on what a size difference looks like between two fighters from an angle such as this, where we can't really see what footwear they're wearing. So in situations like this, I'd usually assume that Norma Dumont might be barefoot and, you know, Chandler may be in some shoes, which is making her look taller than she actually is. Because when you obviously look at the tail of the tape, there's only supposed to be a 1 inch height difference between these two, and as you can see, this is a lot more than 1 inch. But actually, if we look at this video here, it's actually Chandler in flip-flops and Norma Dumont is in shoes. So what that means is Chandler's probably even bigger than this face-off suggests, because obviously you'd expect the sole on shoes to be thicker than the sole on flip-flops. So that's kind of crazy, and is why watching the weigh-ins, watching the face-offs is very important, because if I was just going off the tail of the tape, I'd assume that there wasn't really any size difference between these two at all. But as we can see, definitely is. Chandler, by far the bigger, more physically imposing fighter, which can have an influence on how this matchup plays out, because particularly in women's MMA, physicality can often have quite a big impact on how a fight ends up going. The physicality advantage can close the skill gap somewhat. So, we spoke a lot this week about how many fighters on this card are very tempting bets. If you're a member of my community, if you're a part of my Discord, you will know all of them, right? Because I've posted breakdown videos to the website, for all the prelim matchups on this card. But just to quickly recap, Jun Yong Park's a very tempting bet. Holly Holm is a very tempting bet. Estela Nunes is a very tempting bet. Genaro Valdez is a very tempting bet. But for the reasons that I've already discussed this week, the problem with betting each of these fighters is that we're not overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour, because all of those fighters that we're very tempted to bet have pretty notable weaknesses that their opponent is well positioned to exploit. Generally speaking, those are the types of bets that I'm really trying to avoid these days, because of how much of an impact avoiding these kind of bets has made to our profitability. Norma Dumont is another one of these fighters that is a very tempting bet, but her weaknesses are something that someone like Chelsea Chandler is quite well positioned to exploit. So if we go back to looking at our results, when you look at, we scroll down to the database, when you look at our losers, Moreno, Ismagulov, Aldana, forget about this one, it was a bad bet. But if you look at our last 3 losses, in those fights, the opponents of the guys that we were betting on weren't that well positioned to exploit their opponent's weaknesses. You look at Moreno, good chin, good cardio, good striking, good grappling. Pantoja slows down as fights were on, wasn't particularly well positioned to exploit any of Moreno's weaknesses. He got the win, it's brilliant, but the odds were stacked in our favour. Pantoja had to do a lot to get the win in that fight, which he did, which is great. You look at the Ismagulov loss. Ismagulov's takedown offense is incredible. He's very difficult to hold down and control. Dawson slows down as fights were on. We saw from previous fights, past footage, it was not going to be easy for Dawson to get Ismagulov down and keep him down for long enough to win a decision. He did. He won the fight. That's great. But it wasn't that likely based on past performances. You look at the Aldana fight. She's tough. She's got good cardio. She can fight at a high pace. Juliana Pena in the first fight against Amanda Nunes wrote the blueprint on how to beat Nunes. Aldana was capable of executing that blueprint. She just chose not to. Showed Nunes too much respect early. And obviously Nunes, as a result, destroyed her. But the point being, when you look at all these bets, every single one of them, we stacked the odds in our favour on all of them. Win or lose, our money was in quite a strong position. It was not going to be easy for Kevin Lee to out-grapple a superior grappler like Fakhretdinov, because we know Lee slows down as fights wear on. Randy Brown was significantly better than Wellington Turman everywhere. Jazz Duvicius had a big advantage on the ground over Miranda Maverick. Chase Hooper was a significantly better grappler than Nick Fury. Tainara Lisboa, better everywhere than Jessica Rose Clark. Baylon Mohammed fights at a very high pace. Gilbert Burns slows down as fights wear on. So you can see we're stacking the odds in our favour on all bets, whether they win or lose. The problem that I've got with Jun Yong Park, Norma Dumont, Holly Holm, Stella Nunes and Genaro Valdez this week is that we're not stacking our odds, not stacking the odds in our favour anywhere near as confidently, because they all have major weaknesses that their opponents could potentially exploit. So if we look at this matchup between Chelsea Chandler and Norma Dumont, it's an interesting one because to some extent Norma Dumont is better than Chandler everywhere, and that's why she is a tempting bet. There's 3 issues though. The first issue being the size difference, which we've just looked at. Physicality has an impact on, MMA fights, right? More physically imposing fighters have an edge over their opponent. Chandler's size potentially makes her a lot more physically imposing than Dumont, who's more slight, more feminine. And that gives Chandler an advantage, because on the ground, her strength, her physicality could help her get the better at grappling exchanges. She could also hurt Dumont more on the feet with striking if she's landing the harder, more powerful, more impactful shots. The second problem with Dumont is that she slows down a lot as fights wear on, and Dumont almost always struggles late, whereas Chandler, her cardio has looked pretty good. The third issue with Dumont is kind of tied to the second issue with Dumont, which is her cardio, in that you do see long periods of inactivity from her where she doesn't do a whole lot. She'll spend a long time in the clinch, not doing very much. Long periods of inactivity on the feet where she just doesn't really attack her opponent and throw much. This does make it easy to outwork her and outpoint her at times. You look at her fight against Macy Chiasson, her fight against Felicia Spencer. One of the reasons why both these fights ended up going to a split decision is because these long periods of inactivity mean that Dumont is someone that very often doesn't do a particularly good job of putting their stamp on rounds, and as a result finds that fights end up being razor close. So those are kind of like my three main concerns with betting Norma Dumont this weekend, because you guys know what MMA judges can be like. These days judging is so bad that unless a fighter goes out there and absolutely puts it on their opponent, dominates them beyond all reasonable doubt, there's always a chance that the judges could come to the wrong conclusion on how a round should be scored. And for someone like Dumont, that doesn't do a particularly good job of putting their stamp on rounds, betting her as a slight favourite does feel like I might be playing with fire a little bit. And so I don't want to mess up all the good work that we've done this year with pre-fight betting by loosening up on this card, putting my money in situations where I might take some L's. You know what I'm saying? Like, we're already down a little bit this month. We've won one bet, lost two. So we're down a little bit. Don't want to make the situation worse. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, there's no doubt that Dumont is a far superior striker to Chelsea Chandler. Dumont is far more technical, hits far harder, and Dumont's striking is levels above Chandler. Like, Chandler's quite sloppy, bad defensively, doesn't really have any power in her hands. She's not technical at all when it comes to striking. The problem, though, is that Chandler is busy. She does work hard, she does throw a high volume of strikes, she stays active. And so even though Dumont is the far superior striker from a technical point of view, I wouldn't rule out Chelsea Chandler being able to outwork her and out-hustle her, just because Dumont does have long periods of inactivity. Now, when it comes to grappling, Dumont is also the more technically skilled grappler, but grappling is something that tends to tire Dumont out quite quickly. And Chandler has that size advantage. She's big, she's strong, she is aggressive. And my big concern when it comes to grappling for Dumont in this fight is that Dumont is one of these fighters that is pretty good offensively. Like, her offensive wrestling's decent, her top game's reasonably heavy. But if you put Dumont on her back, she's very, very weak off her back, and you can also tire her out very quickly. Like, if Chandler's able to get this fight to the ground, a big, strong, physically imposing girl like Chandler on top of Dumont will wear Dumont out very quick, which will then close the skill gap on the feet, accelerate the rate at which Dumont slows down, which makes it a lot easier for Chandler to then outwork her in all areas, because if Dumont gets tired, she's going to be sloppier when it comes to striking, easier to take down, easier to hold down, and her volume is going to dip even lower than it already is on the feet. Now, at times Dumont does get very aggressive when it comes to striking, but again, this is not always the smartest thing for Dumont to do, because again, it just accelerates the rate at which she slows. So this is a really complex fight, because there's no doubt that Dumont is better than Chandler everywhere, But like I always say, if the more skilled fighter always won, we'd all be millionaires, because it is very easy to work out who the most skilled fighter is in every MMA fight, right? I could train my mum to do that, and she knows nothing about cage fighting, but very easy to pick out who's more skilled. As we know, a lot more goes into the outcome of MMA fights than that, and I do think there's a lot of things Chandler could do to potentially cause Dumont a problem. So my lean on this fight is no doubt Norma Dumont. I'm very, very tempted to bet her, but I'm not sure. Not sure. Let me know what you think in the comments below or on our Discord if you're a member of my community. Now, in terms of the over-under on this one, neither of these girls is particularly dangerous. If you look at Chandler's record, I know that she has a lot of finishes, but these are against a pretty low level of opponent. Generally speaking, she's more of a grinder. She doesn't really have power on the feet, not a particularly dangerous submission game. She's just a hustler that likes to outwork you standing up and on the ground. When you look at Norma Dumont, she's very much a decisionator. So pretty likely this fight goes to a decision, because both girls are tough, both are pretty difficult to put away. Unfortunately, the odds on that are quite steep. The odds kind of reflect the likelihood that this fight is going to go to a decision, but this isn't one of those matchups where I would take a contrarian view and gamble on fight to end inside the distance. I wouldn't touch that. If you really, really want to bet the over under on this fight, I would stomach the over and bet that, even though the odds aren't particularly great. Now, in terms of the props, the only one that I would consider is Dumont by decision, but the odds are pretty terrible, so I wouldn't bet that if I were you. You're not getting a particularly good risk to reward ratio on your money. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card between Francisco Prado and Otman Azaitar. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that both guys are in the even money odds range. Prado's a slight favourite, which I find interesting, and his average odds are about 1.87, which is going to be minus 115 for an implied probability of 53%. If we take a look at the odds on Azaitar, he is around an average of 1.95, which is minus 105 for an implied probability of 51%. So Prado is 21 years old, 5'11", with a 76-inch reach, and Azaitar, 33 years old, 5'8", with a 71-inch reach. So as we can see, Azaitar will be giving up a decent size and reach advantage to Prado. So Prado's going to have a 5-inch reach advantage over him, be a little bit taller as well. Now we also see that Prado is 12 years younger than Otman Azaitar. However, even though we know statistically this means Prado has a 70% chance of winning, because the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 12-year age gap in a fight, statistics are only as useful as they are interpreted. And this is one of those situations where I actually think the edge might go to Azaitar here. That stat exists to reflect the advantage that young hungry bulls have over aging declining veterans. But in this instance, Prado at 21 years old is very young, very green, very inexperienced. Azaitar, 33 years old, not showing any signs of decline yet. He's only had 14 pro fights. He's going to be a lot more mature, a lot more experienced. So this is one of those situations where I would disregard that stat. And I actually think Azaitar may have the edge here based on that statistic. And so, yeah, it's something where I think the older guy has the edge in a spot like this. Younger guys tend to be very green, more prone to making mistakes. Okay, so how do these two match up from a stylistic point of view? Well, I want to start off by saying I do lean towards Otman Azaitar, and I think if he hadn't been brutally knocked out in his last fight against Matt Frivola, I do think he probably would be a decent sized favourite in this matchup, because I do think he is better than Prado everywhere. Prado is a bit one-dimensional, a bit limited. Prado is one of these guys that is like a generic run-of-the-mill kickboxer who wants to stand in the middle of the octagon and have a nice friendly kickboxing match with you. It's not like he's bad or anything like that, but he rarely tries to take guys down from what I've seen. Obviously, there's not tons of footage available on him, but for the most part, this guy likes to stand and bang. likes to stand and strike. So when you look at Prado, he doesn't really have any power in his hands. He's not the most technical. He's not the most dangerous on the feet. And Azaitar moves very well. He's fast. He's accurate. He's got big power. And so even though Prado will probably land a higher volume of strikes and chip away at Azaitar with volume, I think Azaitar has got the power to actually land the hard, impactful, damaging strikes on Prado that are going to gain the attention of the judges. Now, when it comes to grappling, there's not tons of footage available on the grappling of either guy. There are flashes of Azaitar's ground game from a long time ago. If you go back and watch his fights against like Koldovsky and Martinez, you can see like flashes of his grappling in that fight. But obviously these fights took place a really long time ago, and we haven't really seen anything of Azaitar's grappling from like the last 6 years. So his takedown defense and ground game, his offensive wrestling could have improved a lot over the last 6 years. With Prado, even though you see lots of like submission wins on his record, again, these are against a really low level of opponent. And from how he looked on the ground against Malarkey in his debut, he did look very low level, quite weak on the ground, quite weak off his back, not particularly great. So it's not. It's very hard to give an edge to either guy when it comes to grapplings. There's not tons of recent footage available on their grappling. But from what I've seen, Azaitar does look the better grappler because he's just more positionally aware, like more physically imposing, more scrambly, doesn't accept being in bad positions for as long as Prado does based on that Malarkey fight. So I give Azaitar the slight edge on the feet, the slight edge on the ground. He's older, he's more experienced. His gas tank's pretty good, judging on his fights that went, quite deep back in, looking at the wrong guy. Back in, 2016, 2017. Obviously, there's been a little bit of a scandal with the Azaitar brothers over, the bag on Fight Island. Were they doing anything dodgy? Was there any PED use, any IV use? I don't know. Obviously, with Azaitar, it's been a long time since we saw him go the distance. Maybe USADA will hit him hard and he will gas bad this weekend if the fight goes past round 1. But based on those fights from back in 2017, 2018, his gas tank looks pretty good. Prado's gas tank looks good as well. Just think Azaitar's a little bit better than Prado everywhere in this fight. So I lean towards Azaitar. But I won't be betting him just because I don't have a super strong read on this fight. Because like I say, there's not tons of footage available on either guy's grappling from the last few years. We haven't seen Azaitar go past round 1 in a very long time, so we don't know how he's going to look if this fight goes into the second and third rounds. And also, a big part of my perception of Prado is based on his debut against Jamie Malarkey, and I don't want to judge a guy too harshly for their debut, especially because at 21 years old, someone like Prado is going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. So I want to see him in the second fight now to see what he brings to the table. So if we look at the over-under on this one, it is a tricky one. It is very tricky. As you can see, the bookies think this fight is not going to go to a decision. I'm actually very, very tempted by the over on this fight because styles make fights. And what you'll notice about both these guys is that they're both extremely tough. And what you'll find with guys like Prado and Azaitar is because they're both so tough, so game, so scrappy, when they face lower level opponents, they will get a lot of finishes, right? You look at the guys that Azaitar has been finishing, right? Khanworthy, Timu Pakalan, all these dudes, pretty low level. You look at the guys that Prado has been fighting, right? Pretty low level. And then what happens as soon as Prado faces a step up in competition? All of a sudden, his fight goes to a decision, right? And even though we haven't seen that happen with Azaitar yet, because of how aggressive he was in the Frivola fight, swinging for the fences, looking to go for the knockout, doesn't mean to say that it won't happen now. So the bookies think this fight is very likely to end inside the distance because both guys, fight to a finish a lot of the time. But what we have here is two tough, well-rounded, well-rounded fighters running into each other, both facing a step up in competition. So I could actually see this fight going the distance. So purely letting the odds do the work for you, these odds do feel pretty wide to me, and I will probably be betting on this fight to go to a decision purely because of the odds. I think this is more of a coin flip as to whether it goes to a decision or not. I think it's 50-50. I think the odds on the fight going to a decision or not should be in this odds range. I think these are way too wide. So even though the fight may be a little bit more likely to end inside the distance, I think there's great value on this. So I will probably roll the dice on that, take a little bit of a shot. Take a little bit of a shot. How about that? And the over 1.5 rounds, pretty juicy, pretty juicy as well. We like that a lot. Okay, in terms of the prop bets on this one, Azaitar by decision is interesting to me at 8.0 plus 700. You guys know me, I don't like props, so I probably won't be betting it myself. In fact, I definitely won't be betting it myself. I was just checking the Bitcoin chart and not really concentrating, so that slipped out. But yeah, I won't be betting that myself. I really dislike props. So yeah, hope you found that useful. Alright, now let's get into the fight between Terence McKinney and Nazim Sadykhov. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Terence McKinney is the slight underdog at average odds of around 2.23, which is going to be plus 123 for an implied probability of 45%. We take a look at the odds on Sadykhov. He's around an average of 1.67, which is going to be minus 149 for an implied probability of 60%. So McKinney is 28 years old, 5'10" with a 73.5-inch reach, and Sadykhov, 29 years old, 5'10" with a 69-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size. So when McKinney first came into the UFC, and he came out the gate super hard in the first round of all of his fights, trying to kill everyone in 30 seconds, we knew that his style wasn't sustainable. And when he ran into Drew Dober, obviously he got exposed a little bit because Dober was able to weather that early storm, drag McKinney into the deeper stages of the fight, and then when McKinney was too tired to defend himself, take him out. What we've seen from McKinney since then, in his fights against both Eric Gonzalez and Ishmael Bonfim, is a conscious decision to try and fight safer and smarter and pace himself better. We saw a much less aggressive version of Terence McKinney in his fight against Ishmael Bonfim, but unfortunately he did still gas and end up getting finished in round 2. So with McKinney, I was optimistic that this would be one of those guys that just needed to learn to pace himself. You know, a little bit like Ludwig Klein, for example, where once he realised he wasn't going to come out the gate, wasn't going to be able to come out the gate super hard, kill everyone in 30 seconds, he was going to adjust his pacing, and his cardio would hold up better, and he would turn out to be a pretty solid fighter. Unfortunately, that hasn't happened, because his cardio still looked awful when he fought at a slower pace against Bonfim. So now it appears that McKinney is one of these guys that just has genetically bad cardio and is probably not going to be able to correct it unless his diet and training has been awful up until this point in his career, which after 18 pro fights you wouldn't think it would be. So McKinney is probably going to continue to be one of these guys that slows down a lot as fights wear on, which makes this a potentially difficult fight for him because Sadykhov is well-rounded, decent striking, decent grappling, and Sadykhov is also the kind of fighter that can go hard for 3 rounds no problem. So if Sadykhov can make it through the early stages of this fight, he's likely to do extremely well, just like Drew Dober and just like Ishmael Bonfim. But that won't be easy because McKinney's very dangerous early. You know, aggressive offensive wrestling, dangerous submission game, and devastating knockout power, where he commits very hard to everything that he throws in an effort to try take his opponents out. You know, McKinney's the barrage of attacks that McKinney throws at you is extremely difficult to deal with. It can catch you cold. Now, having said that, McKinney is very reckless, very bad defensively. so he's also prone to getting dinged. Now, what is very interesting about this matchup is that Sadykhov is not a fighter that likes to take a backward step. So the smartest approach to fighting someone like McKinney is to not meet them head on, because if you meet them head on, something's got to give. Either he's getting knocked out or you're getting knocked out. The smart approach to facing someone like McKinney is that you just want to absorb that pressure early. You want to play the role of Matador, let him burn himself out. Don't get into any big exchanges. Don't take any unnecessary risks. Just absorb the pressure, be very defensive, wait for him to burn himself out. That's when you can start to take over, which is kind of what Bonfim did. Sadykhov is interesting because, that doesn't mean that he won't do that this weekend, but he typically doesn't do that. Sadykhov is the kind of guy that likes to come forward, take control of the centre of the octagon, put you on the back foot, stand his ground, not take a backward step, and look to load up on big winging power shots and take you out. He's pretty bad defensively, and that makes this a very interesting fight, because Sadykhov is the exact kind of guy that someone like Terence McKinney could catch cold early and knock out. I mean, Sadykhov was dropped or wobbled. It wasn't really dropped, but he was wobbled in his, in the first round of his UFC debut against Evan Elder. He's very bad defensively, very, very reckless. So this is one of those fights that's very difficult for betting, because with how bad and reckless and willing to throw down and get into big exchanges Sadykhov is, McKinney could definitely get the knockout early with how dangerous he is. However, with how tough Sadykhov is, he's more than capable of weathering the early storm, hanging in there, dragging McKinney into round 2, where he'll be able to take over, win the fight. So this is not a fight I would touch. If you really, really want to bet it, I would go Sadykhov. I don't like the idea of betting on a guy that has to win in round 1. I'd much prefer to bet on someone like Sadykhov that can perform to his full potential for the full 3 rounds. However, I do think McKinney poses enough of a threat to Sadykhov to pass on this one, because Sadykhov, like I say, isn't the best defensively and is more than happy to stand his ground in exchange, which is the exact opposite that you should do with someone like Terence McKinney. And there's really 2 ways to look at it, right? On one hand, you could go, well, Sadykhov's going to be way too smart to do that. He's not going to do that. He's going to fight safer and smarter. But then on the other hand, ego gets the better of a lot of fighters. And how do we know that Sadykhov isn't one of these guys that's going to be too stubborn to change his style for McKinney? And how do we know he's not going to be one of these fighters that's just like, I'm going to do me. I'm not worried about anything he's going to do. I'm going to focus on myself. And I'm the baddest man on the planet, so I'm going to win. A lot of fighters have that perception of themselves and approach to fighting. I don't think it's the best approach, but then I'm not a professional fighter, so what the fuck do I know? Anyway, if we take a look at the over-under on this one, we take a look at the over-under. Where are we? So, obviously, very, very unlikely this fight ends inside the distance. I wouldn't mess with it. Obviously, the odds are very steep on that. The odds are very, very steep. I wouldn't bet that, but I wouldn't bet on the fight to go to a decision either, because McKinney gets the point very quickly in fights where he's too tired to defend himself. And Sadykhov very, very, very aggressive. So I wouldn't mess with that personally. And if we take a look at the prop bets, Sadykhov inside the distance is the most likely outcome. Odds are pretty bad as well. So, yeah, man. Tricky. I mean, other props you could consider maybe Sadykhov in round 2, Sadykhov in round 3. I'll let you make your mind up on that. There are some options for you based on what I've said in this breakdown. So I hope you found that useful. Thank you very much for watching. Take care. Have a great weekend. Hope you crush it. I will be back next week for another breakdown video on YouTube. But remember, it'll probably be another late one, because next week's card is going to be a nightmare to research as well. If you want the breakdown videos early, you can obviously join my community. They get posted on the website earlier than they do to YouTube, just because obviously I prioritize my community first. I get them out on YouTube as fast as I can. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Thank you very much for watching. Take care, everyone. Love you all. Nice one. Bye.